Straight into the panel. I've dropped the introduction because I know that you two are quite fiery and worked up. Now, Rita Panahi, where do we go with the issue of climate change? I just had two fire experts on that we've been hearing from people like them all summer. This is an issue about fuel load. It's not about a document signed off by Malcolm Turnbull in 2015 in Paris. Why are we having this debate that isn't based on fact?
Because it's been presented an opportunity for people who got everything wrong in the lead up to last year's election to politicise a tragedy and to use it to bash a Conservative government. And what we've seen in recent weeks has been utterly unhinged. There's been no semblance of balance or rationality. It has just been something to beat up Scott Morrison and the Conservative government and to fight Nicholas's culture wars, frankly. We didn't have these debates when we had the tragedy of the Black Saturday fires, and the death toll from those fires was horrific. It was around 170. So no one blamed Kevin Rudd for that. No one said Kevin Rudd had blood on his hands because no one would stoop so low. But now, in 2020, that's where we are with political debate, and I think it's absolutely disgraceful.
I mean, you, I know, are involved in a lot of the work around the aftermath of the 2009 Victorian fires. One of the things when I read through the Royal Commission that struck me is just madness. Why, when the recommendations were clear and state government says they'll accept the recommendations, are we down a third? We're burning only a third of the recommended target last year. How's that?
Well, look, I think what you've got to remember when it comes to burnbacks is that the safe period for burnbacks to occur is much shorter than it used to be.
Not only 10 years,
because of the drought and the prevalence of warmer days, the number of days in which fire service can safely clear and burn back has been limited, and so that has limited the amount.
You're not going to have me believe that in 10 years the climate has changed so dramatically that we've lost 2/3 of the recommended burns. If you had said that, a 15% drop or 12%, 20% drop, I might have believed it, but not a 66% drop on the recommendations.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's the only factor, but there's a very clear message, I think, out of these awful bushfires over the summer, and that is that Australia, sadly, is disproportionately affected by climate change, and therefore, more than ever, we need to see a strong response in this country.
The expert just on there, though, just said forest type. He also said the Australian forest type, because it doesn't perish and combust in the way that they do in Europe. The Australian eucalypt forest type is also a really big factor.
Oh, absolutely. The Australia flora, particularly with the eucalypt, and as your previous guest described it, does make us particularly susceptible to fire. But we know that temperatures in Australia are 1.5 degrees warmer than the long-term average. We know it's drier than it's ever been, and that has meant that for the forests of Australia, they are very, very susceptible to these huge fires. Now, if we're going to try and do something about that as a country, if we want to see the world do something about that, then Australia needs to step up in terms of its climate change response, and it also needs to significantly step up in terms of its bushfire preparedness as well.
But Nicholas, the intensity of those fires and the fact that firefighters couldn't even get close to a lot of them to have any sort of impact is because of the fuel load. We know that. So why is acknowledging that undeniable fact so offensive to so many people on the left? The fact that fuel loads are a major contributor to the intensity of these fires, and that we need to do... People are getting fined for trying to just manage their own property, their own land. They want to clear a little bit of shrub to secure their own properties. They're getting massive fines. They're getting massive obstruction from councils and the Department of Environment. We've got to do something about that.
We're talking about fires this summer that have raised 12 million hectares of forest. The idea that you could go in and reduce fuel load across 12 million hectares.
Well, of course you won't do that. That's nonsensical. I mean, if you're doing that,
so I think
no one suggested
better forest management practices is most certainly.
We can all throw statistics around, but I made the point tonight in 74, 75, the fires burnt well over 100 million hectares long before we talked about warming climate and climate change.
We didn't have a firefighting service back then, so
Nick
once
Rees,
the fire
don't insult
started,
my intelligence.
we didn't have a firefighting firefighting service
What
back
year
in...
were you referring
Oh,
to?
1974,
I
75.
thought you said 1874.
I think we're going to have to leave that there tonight. We were going to get on to Bridget McKenzie. She will, I'm sure, stay warmed up and on simmer for tomorrow night. Rita Panahi, Nick Rees, thanks for your time and welcome back. New decade,
Yes.
lots of fun.